There are 5 different elements, or better known as attributes, in Zenless Zone Zero, and they all have special effects. But that is not all. They are also dependent on your agent's stats, and which role your agent are can also have some impact on how well they will perform with these attributes. And then we also have the Daze system in this game, which is quite important to understand if you want to know more about attributes. What's up everyone, my name is XLRJ, and after watching this video, you will understand how the basics of combat works in Zenless Zone Zero. Before we get to the different attributes, you have to understand how Daze works. When you look at the enemy's health bar, you will see another bar below it. This is what we call the Daze bar, and you can fill this bar up just by attacking the enemy. When this bar reaches 100%, the Daze bar starts to flash, while it decreases over time. This is what we call the stunned state, and while the enemy is in the stunned state, they will take increased damage. But it gets even better. If you use a heavy attack against the enemy while they are stunned, it will trigger a chain attack that deals a lot of damage. Inside of special attacks, the last hit of basic attacks, chain attacks and ultimates are heavy attacks to trigger this. But when a chain attack is triggered, you will see a slow motion effect with a countdown bar displayed at the bottom. This allows you to choose which agent you use to trigger the chain attack within the time limit. Once the Daze bar decreases to 0, the enemy will return to its normal state and you can fill up the Daze bar again. So what it comes down to is, you have 2 phases in combat. An assault phase where you are trying to fill up the Daze bar, and the burst phase where you are trying to do as much damage as possible once the Daze bar is filled, allowing you to deal more damage. Let's go through the attributes, starting with physical. Physical in this game is pretty straightforward once you understand the Daze system. After attacking the enemy with physical damage and building up a attribute anomaly, you will trigger an effect called Assault. What this does is, it will interrupt all types of enemy actions and deal massive physical damage. But this is where things gets interesting. Once Assault triggers, it will also increase the amount of days the target takes for a period of time, making physical a really strong attribute for your team, and perfect as an opener on the enemy, so that you can get that extra damage while the enemy is stunned. Next, we have Fire. Fire can apply burn to an enemy once you have built up enough attribute anomaly, and it has an additional effect that interrupts organic enemies. And yes, there is different types of enemies in Zenless Zone Zero, and some attributes works better against them than others. Burn deals continuous fire damage to the enemy, and it is considered the highest damage between all the current attributes. Electric can apply shock to enemies, and it can interrupt machine enemies. The difference between shock and burn is that shock has a 5-second cooldown, and it will trigger when you attack the enemy again, dealing additional damage. So it is like dealing more damage with your normal attacks. Ice is a pretty strong attribute that can freeze enemies of all types, making them unable to act, and it also applies a frostbite effect to them for a period of time. What's even better about Ice is that if you freeze an enemy in the stunned phase through the Daze bar, it will actually pause the Daze bar, allowing you to deal even more damage in the stunned phase. Another thing about Ice is, after a period of time or upon taking heavy attacks, Shatter can be triggered, dealing a lot of damage to the enemy. The Frostbite effect will stay even after Shatter, and Frostbite increases the crit damage taken by the target. Now obviously this is great, especially while the enemy is stunned, and it seems like Ice has a lot of valuable effects, which is pretty neat. Next we have Ether. Ether is similar to Electric that also deals additional damage on attacks, with a state called Corrupted. But the cooldown is different. For Ether, the cooldown to trigger additional damage while the enemy is corrupted is about 0.5 seconds. More or less, so this means that the character that can attack really fast in a short amount of time is perfect with Ether's corruption. One last really important thing about attribute anomaly is that there is a thing called disorder, and how it works is, if you place one attribute anomaly on an enemy like burn, and you then place another attribute anomaly on the enemy, it will cause an effect called Disorder. This will override the original effect, in this case Burn, and deal extra damage and daze, meaning you can only have one effect on the enemy at a time, but if you do swap attributes, it will deal extra damage to the enemy. Now that you know about attributes, just a short side note that enemies comes in different types and are vulnerable to different attribute damage. Organic and corrupted enemies are vulnerable to fire type attacks, machines are vulnerable to electric type attacks, and Ethereal is vulnerable to ether type attacks. While it is something you probably will just learn while playing the game, I think it is worth pointing out. Stats in this game has a lot of similarities to other games, but there are some differences worth pointing out and explaining. The most important stat that is not common in other games is Impact. What Impact does is when you are attacking enemies, it will increase the amount of daze the enemy takes. A higher impact stat allows more daze to accumulate with each attack, making it easier to get the enemy into the stunned state to deal more damage. Another one that might be a bit complicated is Pen, which stands for Penetration. Penetration ignores a set amount of the target's defense based on the Pen stat when attacking an enemy, while Pen Ratio ignores a percentage of the target's defense based on the Pen Ratio stat when attacking an enemy. So just as an example to understand this better, if you have 50 penetration, you ignore 50 defense from the enemy. If you have 50 penetration ratio, you will ignore 50% of the enemy's defense. So one is a flat number while the other one is a percentage. Anomaly Mastery increases the attribute anomaly build-up when using attribute attacks, meaning it makes it easier and faster to apply anomaly on the enemies like Burn, Freeze, Shock, and so on, while Anomaly Proficiency increases the damage done by these attribute anomalies. We then have Energy Regen, which after entering combat, agents passively generate energy every second. The higher this value is, the more energy gained per second. Energy generation rate is also a stat that will increase the energy generated through energy regen and attacking enemies. And just in case you didn't know, you can see your energy below your agent's health bar, and this allows you to use special attacks. Let's talk about the agent's roles you get in this game. There is 5 different roles: Attack, Stun, Support, Defense, and Anomaly. Agents with the attack role possesses formidable damage output capabilities, making them the perfect agent within the burst phase while the enemy is stunned. Agents with the stun role specializes in building up daze quickly to stun the enemy, so they are great for making your squad have more openings to deal a lot of damage while the enemy is stunned. Support agents are able to aid and enhance other agents in battle, providing your squad with buffs and improving their combat efficiency by reducing the enemy's resistance or making the enemy take more damage. Agents with defense roles have strong survivability like tanks in other games. They also have attacks to counterattack, seizing the upper hand for their side in the heat of battle. And then agents with anomaly are exceptional with applying debuffs, excelling at accumulating anomaly buildup to weaken enemies and deal damage by triggering attribute anomalies. But speaking of agents, if you'd like to know which characters will be available on release for the first 2 phases of the game ahead, make sure to check out this video about the upcoming banners in Zenless Zone Zero. Peace out!